Ariana Grande stopped mid-sentence. A photograph appeared on the studio screen. Her voice completely vanished. And when Jimmy Fallon saw that photograph, he had to stop the show. It was a Tuesday night at Studio 6B in Rockefeller Center. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Another packed audience. Another A-list celebrity guest. Ariana Grande was promoting her new album, sitting in the guest chair looking radiant in an elegant black dress, her signature ponytail perfect, her smile bright as she told a funny story about recording sessions. Everything was going exactly as planned. Jimmy was laughing at all the right moments. The audience was engaged. The Roots were ready with musical cues. The cameras captured every angle with practiced precision. This was supposed to be a standard celebrity interview. Light. Fun. Entertaining. The kind of segment that would get clipped and shared on social media by morning. But backstage, producer Katie Chin was holding a manila folder and making a decision that would change everything. Inside that folder was a photograph. An old one. Faded colors, slightly worn edges. The kind of photo that gets pulled from a shoebox in someone's attic. Katie had received it 3 days ago from a viewer in Boca Raton, Florida, along with a handwritten letter explaining why it mattered. Katie had shown it to Jimmy before the taping. This is heavy," Jimmy had said, studying the image. "Are we sure about this?" "The woman who sent it said Ariana needs to see it," Katie had replied. "She said it's important. That it would mean everything." Jimmy had looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he nodded. "Okay. But we do it gently. And if Ariana wants us to stop, we stop immediately." Now, 12 minutes into the interview, Katie stood in the control room with her finger hovering over the button that would display the photograph on the large LED screen visible to both Jimmy and Ariana. She took a breath and pressed it. The photograph appeared on the screen behind Jimmy's desk. A moment frozen in time from 1995. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, with a huge smile and a homemade cardboard sign that read, "I love music," in crayon. Standing beside her was an elderly woman with white hair and warm eyes, her arm around the little girl's shoulders. Ariana was mid-sentence, telling Jimmy about a vocal technique she'd discovered, when her eyes drifted to the screen. The words died in her throat. Her entire body went rigid. Her smile vanished. Her hands, which had been gesturing animatedly, froze mid-air and slowly lowered to grip the armrests of her chair. Jimmy noticed immediately. He turned to look at the screen, then back at Ariana, his expression shifting from comedic host to genuine concern in an instant. "Ariana?" he said softly. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. She was staring at the photograph like it had reached across 30 years and grabbed her by the heart. Tears were forming in her eyes, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. The band sensed something was wrong. Questlove lowered his drumsticks. The other musicians exchanged confused glances. The audience, which had been laughing moments before, fell into uncertain silence. Jimmy stood up from his desk, his blue interview cards scattering across the surface. He walked over to Ariana's chair and crouched down beside her, his voice gentle. "Hey! Talk to me! What's happening?" Ariana's hand was covering her mouth, tears now streaming down her face. She pointed at the screen with a trembling finger. That's my nana. That's my grandmother. And that's me. I was 7 years old." Jimmy looked back at the photograph, then at Ariana. "Your grandmother?" "She died," Ariana whispered, her voice breaking. "When I was 8. I haven't seen a picture of her in years." Where did this come from?" Jimmy glanced toward the control room, then back at Ariana. He made a decision in that moment that would define this segment, not as entertainment, but as something real. "Hold on," he said, standing up and addressing his crew. "Stop everything. Cut the music. Somebody get me the folder from backstage. And Ariana." He looked down at her with genuine warmth. If you want to stop, if you want to take a break, we stop right now. Ariana shook her head, wiping tears from her cheeks. No. I want to know. Where did this come from? Katie appeared from backstage carrying the manila folder. She handed it to Jimmy along with the handwritten letter. Jimmy sat down in the guest chair next to Ariana, breaking the traditional host-guest seating arrangement, and opened the folder. A woman named Rosa Martinez sent this to us 3 days ago, Jimmy explained, reading from the letter. She lives in Boca Raton, Florida. She says she was your grandmother's neighbor for 10 years. And she says your nana. He paused, his own voice getting thick with emotion. Your nana talked about you every single day. Ariana's breath hitched. Rosa? Mrs. Martinez? You remember her? She used to babysit me sometimes. She lived next door. She made the best empanadas. Ariana looked at the photograph again, fresh tears falling. I can't believe she kept this picture. Jimmy pulled another item from the folder, a sealed envelope with Ariana's name written on it in shaky handwriting. She sent something else too. She says your grandmother wrote you a letter before she died. But you were so young, and the family thought it might be too painful, so they kept it. Rosa's had it for 27 years. She says your nana made her promise to give it to you when the time was right. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The studio was completely silent now. 300 audience members watching something unfold that transcended celebrity interviews and late-night television. This was real grief, real memory, real love reaching across time. Jimmy held out the envelope. Do you want to read it? You don't have to. Not here, not now. You can take it and read it private. No, Ariana interrupted, taking the envelope with trembling hands. I want to read it. I need to. She carefully opened the envelope, pulling out 2 pages of handwritten letter, the ink slightly faded but still legible. The handwriting was shaky. The writing of someone very ill, but determined to finish. Ariana read silently for a moment, her tears falling onto the paper. Then her voice, that powerful voice that had sung to millions, cracked as she began to read aloud. My precious Ariana, my little songbird. By the time you read this, I will be watching you from heaven, but I want you to know some things. She paused, composing herself. Jimmy reached over and squeezed her hand. The audience was crying now too. Even the camera operators had tears streaming down their faces. Ariana continued. You have a gift, Mia Cara. The most beautiful voice I have ever heard. But more than that, you have a beautiful heart. Never let this business make you forget who you are. Never let fame steal your kindness. Stay the little girl who made me that sign that said I love music. Stay the child who sang to me when I was sick. She stopped, unable to continue. Jimmy took the letter gently from her hands and read the final paragraph for her. I am so proud of you. I will always be proud of you. When you sing, remember that I am listening. When you are sad, remember that I am holding you. When you forget your way, look for the music. It will always lead you home. Ti amo per sempre. Your nana. The studio erupted, not in applause, but in that collective sound of hundreds of people crying together. Ariana buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jimmy wrapped his arm around her, tears on his own cheeks, no longer the comedian, but simply a human being sharing another person's grief. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Jimmy looked at his producer in the control room and made a cutting gesture across his throat. Stop the recording. He turned to the audience. Folks, we're going to take a break. Not a commercial break. An actual break. Ariana needs a moment, and we're going to give her whatever time she needs. He stood up and offered Ariana his hand. Come on. Let's go backstage for a minute. But Ariana shook her head. No. I want to stay. I want to keep going. Are you sure? She nodded, wiping her eyes with tissues someone from the crew had rushed over. My nana would want me to keep going. She always said the show must go on. But Jimmy. She looked at him with such raw gratitude. Thank you? Thank you for showing me this. Jimmy sat back down, but this time he didn't return to his desk. He stayed in the chair beside Ariana, the letter still in his hand. Can I ask you something? He said gently. What was your grandmother like? And for the next 20 minutes, the interview disappeared. In its place was simply a conversation. Ariana told stories about her nana. How she taught her to make pasta from scratch, how she sang old Italian songs while cooking, how she believed Ariana would be a star long before anyone else did. She took me to my first voice lesson, Ariana said, her voice stronger now, steadied by memory. She paid for it with money she'd been saving for a new winter coat. When my mom found out, she tried to pay her back, but Nana refused. She said this is an investment in something much more important than staying warm. Jimmy listened, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just creating space for Ariana to remember. The audience listened too, no longer spectators but witnesses to something sacred. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. When Ariana had told her stories, when she'd laughed through tears and cried through laughter, Jimmy did something he'd never done in 12 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He reached up and loosened his tie. Then he took it off completely. This was my father's tie, Jimmy said, holding it carefully. He gave it to me the night I got this job. He said, wear this when you need to remember what matters. I've worn it on every first show of the season for 12 years. He held it out to Ariana. I want you to have it. Ariana's eyes widened. Jimmy, no. I can't take your father's. Yes, you can, Jimmy interrupted gently. Because your Nana's letter just reminded me what my dad was trying to tell me. It's not about the show. It's not about the ratings or the viral clips or any of that. It's about the people. It's about moments like this, when we get to be real with each other. He placed the tie carefully in Ariana's hands, on top of her grandmother's letter. Keep them together. A reminder from two people who believed in you before the world did. Ariana clutched both the letter and the tie to her chest and cried again, but this time they were different tears. Not grief alone, but gratitude. Connection. The knowledge that she'd been loved across time and space in ways she'd forgotten. The audience rose as one. Standing ovation. But it wasn't the excited applause of entertainment. It was the reverent applause of people honoring something precious. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The segment never aired in its original form. Instead, Jimmy and Ariana decided together to share it as a special digital release, with all the raw emotion intact. They wanted people to see that celebrities are human. That grief doesn't care about fame. That sometimes the most important thing a talk show can do is stop being a talk show and start being a conversation. Rosa Martinez, the neighbor who'd kept the letter for 27 years, was flown to New York the following week. Ariana met her backstage before another Tonight Show taping. They cried together. They looked at more old photographs. Rosa shared more stories about Nana that Ariana had been too young to remember. She would watch you on TV, Rosa told Ariana. And she would say to me, that's my granddaughter. I knew she would shine. Jimmy's tie hangs in Ariana's home now, framed beside her grandmother's letter and that photograph of a 7-year-old girl with a cardboard sign. She looks at them before every concert. And Jimmy Fallon learned something that night that changed how he approached his show. Not every segment needs to be funny. Not every interview needs to be promotional. Sometimes the most powerful thing television can do is create space for people to remember, to grieve, to heal. The Tonight Show is still funny. Jimmy still does his bits and his games and his celebrity impressions. But every so often, when the moment calls for it, he stops being the host and starts being human. And that's the legacy of the night Ariana Grande saw her Nana's face again.